I'm really pleased to have Jan Winhall here. And we actually talked in 2017 on the first summit as well. And today
Yeah.
she's going to talk about the polyvagal system and addiction and her upcoming book about that. So, Jan, let's just get started. Maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit and kind of how did you get from starting as a therapist to here? So
Right.
interesting place where you landed.
Right. Well, I started about 40 years ago, believe it or not. I mean, it's just shocking, really, to think about that. But I started as a young social worker out of graduate school with a group of women who were incest survivors.
Mhm.
And at that time, it was nobody was really doing that. Very few people doing that work. But I was lucky enough. It's a funny term to use for this, but it really it was an amazing experience, and it shaped my whole life's work really, in terms of trying to understand what was going on for these young women. We were situated in a really rough part of outside of Toronto, big city, and they were doing all kinds of things that they were telling me about slowly over time as they began to trust me a little bit. Like, cutting themselves and picking at themselves and poking and downing lots of drugs and alcohol and getting into all kinds of unsafe sexual situations. And, it was actually within a hospital setting. So I was being told that, they all had borderline personality disorder and they were manipulative and acting out, and I should really, be careful and keep my distance. And really, these women were treated with contempt. There's
Mhm.
no question about that.
Mhm.
And in Trauma and Recovery, Judith Herman's wonderful book that's just as good now as it was then, I think. She talks about that, how these women are treated with utter contempt, right? I think it's a fear response. People are so shocked by these behaviors, right? And so none of that made any sense to me, that they were, um, you know, just, it was all just about trying to get attention. And even if it was like, well, then we better pay attention.
Right. That would be a
Gee,
logical.
yeah. And so I kind of carefully, because I didn't want to be fired, but I was really intrigued, and I just listened. I listened with what I call non pathologizing ears.
Mm,
And I just listened to what were these behaviors about. And of these behaviors, of course, became addictive. Not all of them, not all the time, but they did. And when I really listened to these women, what I heard was that they helped them. These behaviors helped them. And so I kind of embodied way back then this sense of something that is helping you, that is also simultaneously harming you.
right.
And that paradox stayed with me. And so I began to get a sense, because I'm a very visual person, I began to get a sense of what it felt like and looked like there with these women in the group. That there was this, and the language that we used back then in as feminist therapists, we talked a lot about these behaviors, right, and trying to understand them. And the awareness that we had about that back then, I mean, this isn't new. All that's happening now, we had it back then.
Right.
We just weren't listened to because we were
Mhm.
women,
Yeah.
and uh, and because now what's happened is that Steve's polyvagal theory has given us a neurophysiological explanation for
Uh,
these behaviors. That these behaviors are neurophysiological state changers.
right.
They shift us from what we used to call flooding and numbing. That's what I started to piece together. And way back then, what I had was this sense that there was this shift in the body, from flooding to numbing, and that
Mhm.
it helped these people
Right.
because you could sense and see in the body the shutdown, what we would now call dorsal state,
Mhm.
when they would, the eyes would kind of glaze over and they would not be there really in the room.
Right.
And what we all kind of figured out together was that that was helpful.
Mhm.
And there was nothing sick about it. It was the body's way of surviving when there
Mm.
wasn't enough, what now we would call ventral connection or safety and grounding.
Right.
So
And
that's
what percent
a little nutshell of
Yeah. Yeah.
how I put it together, but it came in layers, and
Mhm.
I want to show you the layers
Mhm.
so you'll get a sense.
Yeah, let's get into that.
What I practice is called focusing oriented trauma therapy. It's focusing is something that Gene Gendlin, he always joked about how he didn't make it up. He discovered that this is how the body works. The model that I created is called the Felt Sense Polyvagal Model to treat addiction, and it's an integration basically of the work of Gendlin with the felt sense in the body, and Steve Porges' polyvagal theory, and many other kind of pieces that I've integrated into the model because it's very multi-layered. So
Mhm.
I'm just going to go here to show you. So this is the client version of the model in Spanish. Here we go in English.
Mhm.
Um, so you see here, basically, what I had in the beginning was flight fight, which we would call flooding, and then over on the other side, freeze and fawn, which I added, which is a kind of appeasing response.
Mhm.
Um, and this was what I originally had a sense of, that women were telling me, is that they would be either overwhelmed with flooding feelings, and whatever they were doing up here would propel them into a state of dissociation.
Mhm.
Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So what I did over time was to make a model that now integrates some other aspects of also polyvagal theory. And I called it the 6 F's just to make it simple so that clients really like this model. They take pictures of it on their phone. We
Mhm.
use it in my office. I made a big 2 by 3 foot, and we trace where people are in terms of their neurophysiological state during the session and at other, experiences that happen. Um, and so that was the first kind of piece that I got here, and that these addictive behaviors were propelling people from either a flight fight state of overwhelm into shutdown freeze, or the other way. So at first that was confusing. But as I listened, I realized, you can also end up doing things that jolt the body in order to feel alive again
Mhm.
when you're too
Mhm.
dead, right? And we know that now, that people will get into these behaviors that are really adrenaline pumping, to wake the body up. But then in addiction, of
Right.
course, we just live up here. There's
Mhm.
very little of down here. So what's here? Okay, so I want to just not jump the gun too much. So this looks very complicated, but we're all clinicians and we're smart and we take our time to learn new things.
Mhm.
And so the second kind of wave of understanding things came not with polyvagal theory, but earlier on with interpersonal neurobiology, Dan Siegel's work and Bonnie Badenoch. And I did some training there and I realized, so in interpersonal neurobiology, we talk about chaos and rigidity,
Mhm.
and that these are similar states, the same states in the nervous system. And so I started integrating more of that work, and also like the window of tolerance, the notion of really that what we're working with here is emotion regulation.
Right.
And to what I really liked about this model was that if you take it, and polyvagal theory, if you take it far enough, you realize that you can move right out of a pathologizing system and into a very positive sort of model of strength-based model of integration that Siegel talks about. So that integration then moves down here into this state of the ventral vagus. So let's go back, and I just want to add then. So then I had these different kind of theoretical orientations, and then when I was I went to one of Deb Dana's workshops, and I realized as I was looking at um, these places that really it was absolutely true that this addictive behavior acted as a propeller in the autonomic nervous system. And as Steve talks about these intertwining states in the system, right? So then I realized that addiction was another one of these intertwining states. So the big thing, the amazing thing for us, I think, in terms of polyvagal theory, is understanding how Steve came to this place of um, discovering, recognizing this dorsal shutdown, the dorsal branch of the autonomic nervous system, right?
Hmm.
So, in the traditional model, um, the way that lots of physicians are still even trained, not in terms of polyvagal theory, although it's certainly taking off, but they learned about, basically two states in the nervous system, this ventral state and the sympathetic state.
Hmm.
That was the old model of the ANS, the autonomic nervous system. And then when I read about this, I thought it was so fascinating when Steve talks about in his very challenging and wonderful the first book about polyvagal, about how he realized they were studying infants that were really seriously ill um, and premature. And these infants they expected that when they were in this kind of very ill place, that they would be responding in their little nervous systems with flight fight. But what they found was that they were actually, the heart rates were much lower. They were more in this other kind of place that wasn't really it wasn't identified in the autonomic nervous system, the traditional way of understanding it. Um, but pediatricians that were working with babies understood this place, and so this was the vagal paradox. Was like
Yeah.
the same kind of paradox that I bumped into in a different way, that something that is helping you is also harming you.
Hmm.
Because what he discovered was that, when the system is really under threat, it doesn't stay in flight fight, it shuts down into freeze. And that's the dorsal branch of the vagus.
Hmm.
So that's huge, because for us as trauma therapists, we knew that place, right?
Hmm.
We knew that place in our clients. We could see it in their bodies. I could see it with these young women. And now we have a way of explaining it in terms of neurophysiology, that this state over here is the body's way of kind of, I think of it as like hibernating. When you're
Hmm.
trying to shut down all the systems, enough that energy is conserved to just try to survive. And so we see how, then I realized, well, that these addictive behaviors are ways that propel the body, shift the body from one of these states to the other. And it's what they call an intertwining or a blended state.
Mhm.
There are other intertwining and blended states Steve and Deb Dana talk about in their books. So there's an intertwining state that we all really, I think, can relate to. They call it play. I just made it 6 F's to make it simple. I called it fun.
Mhm.
And in fun, you see this blending of yellow and red. So this is an autonomic state that blends safety and a bit of pumped adrenaline. And in that state, you can see how the nervous system works, because if you listen to kids playing, for example, and there's laughter and they're having fun, and then all of a sudden somebody gets hurt, and it moves up into either crying and coming seeking comfort with mom or dad or somebody, into flight, or they get mad and they start to fight. And it's just such a really good example of how the nervous system works. And then over here, we see this in flow, or stillness, Steve calls it. In this state, we have our practices of meditation and focusing and prayer and lovemaking. So, this is the state where it is safe. So, we have enough of this ventral place that I call flock, because it's the social engagement place, the
Mhm.
place where we come together to be held and to feel comfort. And then so there's this safe place in flow, but also we have a shutdown in the sense that there's safety in stillness, in immobilization. So it's not shutting down in a dissociated way.
Right.
It's this the safety that comes from being able to immobilize and stay still.
Mhm.
Right, when we feel safe, when we're, say, breastfeeding our babies, or Steve would call it being safe in the arms of a loved one.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so we can work with
Very
these states, right, with our clients, and help them to understand what's going on in your body. And this means that we have to shift as therapists to really work in an embodied way,
Mhm.
to go into the body.
I think it's very helpful for people to understand something like this, partly because it helps to take some of the shame and the blame out of it. Okay, you have a mammal nervous system. This is how it works. It's not like there's something wrong with you. This is just how it works for everybody. I think that's tremendously empowering for people to know that.
It's tremendously empowering, and it really challenges us to think about a huge paradigm shift. So, in my
Mm.
book, I ended up creating a new assessment tool as well, an embodied assessment and treatment tool, to help us to rethink and understand what we're doing with people in a way that's completely depathologizing. So,
Ah.
I call these moments are, they're just incredible in therapy. These moments, what I call, of liberation, just what you're
Mhm.
talking about there, Lynn, where people realize there's nothing about what you're doing that is sick or wrong. It can be very hurtful to you and people around you,
Mhm.
and that's not okay. But it's our body's natural way of trying to survive
Mhm.
when we perceive or we are in states that are completely unsafe, right?
Right.
And
And
so
we've
there's,
gotten ourselves out of it somehow and
yeah,
survived. So that's
yeah,
a good thing.
that is a good thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
And these felt shifts in the body, this is where Gendlin's work comes in, because Gendlin and Rogers, Carl Rogers, so Jean was a student of Rogers, they noticed what they called moments of movement in the body. And those moments of movement seem to be the most important thing in terms of how people made changes. And so they studied that. And Janlin was actually interested in that too, because he did these studies way back in the 1960s looking at galvanic skin response with people who were in therapy sessions. And galvanic skin response is a sympathetic response in the nervous system. It's sweating.
Mhm.
And so when I discovered that, I was so excited because I thought, wow, there it is again, right? This is how we
Mhm.
live in our bodies. It's just so important to then think about the implications of that we need to move right away from models that talk about disorder in terms of
Right.
addiction and models that talk about addiction as an illness. It doesn't fit when we understand it in terms of polyvagal theory. It's not an
Right.
illness, it's a response in the nervous system. It can result in for some people with physical illness, but to shape it like that, it doesn't make any sense. It makes much more sense to understand it in terms of trauma, for example,
Mhm.
right? Oppression. These three main branches of the autonomic nervous system, helpful to just kind of review that. So, flock is this place of safety, the
Mhm.
ventral branch of the vagus that Steve talks about, the social engagement system. We see how with addiction that addiction is at the opposite end of the model, right? Flock is down here, addiction is up here, and fixate. So, in that addictive state, we're isolating. We are not engaged socially. And we may be doing things with other people that are addictive, and that doesn't mean people don't have relationships, but there is this way in which there's the brain is kind of really focused on, meeting that addictive need, that little dopamine hit. And so our work is very much about helping people to engage in these social um, connections. And so most of the work that I do is in groups. And I don't even work so much anymore with addiction groups. I work with people in groups using the model. And we talk about seeing addiction as a bad habit. Mark Lewis's work, I have a chapter in the book about that. Such an important piece to understand the role of neuroplasticity and how the brain in addiction falls down these kind of these rigid neural pathways. But through these practices that we have of focusing and meditation and um, all kinds of different ways now that people are working in the body with parts as well. I mean, we did that many years ago too, but it's really taken off now. These are all ways of engaging and working on integration. And when people understand that, firstly, that, as you were saying, that it's not like you did something horrible and wrong, it's how we're wired to survive. And also that we can do things, we can develop practices, daily practices that help us to move past that place of addiction. So this notion that you're always an addict is just not true. Just
Mhm.
not true.
To have nervous system responses to our experiences from the past is a very different way of looking at it, and a lot more I think it's a lot more true as well, but it's a lot more hopeful. I mean, we can do something. Can you just talk a little bit too about focusing for people who might not know what that is?
Sure. So Janlin discovered way back in the 60s in this that when he looked at how people were responding in psychotherapy sessions, he found that there were these long kind of pauses that happened for people that were in the therapy sessions that were reporting that they were doing well.
Mhm.
And he thought, what's that all about? So as he interviewed people from all these process recordings that he did, he found that what people were doing when they were pausing is they were connecting into their bodies knowing.
Oh.
They were looking up or looking and noticing, how does that register for me? How does that my body carry that? And that what happened in therapy sessions is if you really paid attention to that embodied kind of knowing, what we would now also connect with the right hemisphere,
Mhm.
right? That and you did it in a way that had compassion. So what you might do with a really close friend, you're
Mm.
upset, your body's up in that agitated flight fight state. You call and say, "Let's have a cup of coffee." And your friend listens, and you know how to connect with your body.
Mhm.
You just know because you've never lost that connection, as
Mhm.
so many of us do, because we live in a culture that splits it.
Mhm.
And then your friend gives you this kindness, and you notice that as you're working through the problem, something shifts in your body and you feel better. You might even have a good cry,
Mhm.
but you feel a release in the body, a physical release. And that physical release is what we call the felt shift.
Mhm.
And that's what Gendlin noticed was happening for people in psychotherapy when they reported that that it was helpful
Mhm.
and that they were able to make a lot of changes in their life.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. And so that felt shift is the same thing in a sense that happens in the body with addiction, except in addiction, that shift doesn't carry us forward in life. It isn't about integration, as Siegel would say.
Right.
It doesn't carry meaning and help
Mhm.
us because the body knows. We know when we need something, we need to pay attention, but we've lost this.
Mhm.
Focusing is simply a six step. Gene created six steps to help people to find their way back in there again.
Ah, okay. Right.
And so the felt sense is the body's sense of understanding and knowing and being with an experience that occurs. And when we have that real sense of integration, we have a way of connecting with all of our experience in a felt sense. So, for example, right here, I have feelings about what we're doing in the moment. It's kind of exciting,
Mhm.
fun. And then I have thoughts about it, like lots of thoughts, about what I want to share, about what I've learned, and then I have physical sensation in the body. So pretty ventral. I feel safe, and also a little bit of sympathetic. Some little bit of adrenaline because here we are and we're doing a webinar and it's
Yeah.
fun, and you know, so there's that, and then there's memories. All of that, like a part of what might remind me of when we did this before, for example,
Mhm.
and all of that creates a kind of integration of an experience.
Right.
And when I'm grounded and I'm not triggered, I can access all of those different aspects of experience into a full felt sense. I'm here in my body with my feelings and my thoughts and my memories. When
Right.
trauma occurs, that's a different story, right? Trauma
Mm.
shatters a lot of that sense of integration. And because of the dorsal vagus, we understand through dissociation that some aspects of experience could be unavailable to us.
Right. Can you say a little bit more about that?
When I'm really numbing, I move out of that ventral state, right, where my prefrontal cortex is connected, and I'm aware of what's going on, and I feel safe enough, and I can think through what needs to happen.
Right.
When I'm in a trauma state, I lose that connection. I go up into the sympathetic. The amygdala part of the brain goes, ah, and memory gets impaired.
Right.
And we skip all of that kind of beautiful integration processing. and we lose that, and then we can go to shutdown. So in our trauma work, we help clients to, I find it very helpful to work with those different avenues into the felt sense, because you can track them. As you know, many people are doing this in different ways. um, Janlin never meant that focusing was some big answer to everything and that nobody else knew anything.
Mhm.
We really delight in integrating the felt sense into, and that is happening now, into many different kinds of embodied therapies, right?
Mhm.
But I do want to say that I think a lot of the time people don't really appreciate the the real nature of felt sense,
Mhm.
that people tend to see it as sensation,
Okay.
and that's not right.
They lose that integrated wholeness aspect of it?
That it really involves the wholeness of experiencing and meaning,
Right.
that the body knows things about what we need to do that our heads don't know. So
Mhm.
Jean would say, you know, my head will tell you all kinds of things, but let me just go down inside and check and see what is going on down in there.
Right.
And then as we slow everything down and bring attention inside, then we track, oh, there's a kind of funny little swirly red ball of something in my chest.
Right.
And then we work with that, right? Because that's not something that's going to come from up here in the left hemisphere as we're chatting.
No.
That's accessing a deeper level of experiencing.
So when you're in a group with people, if they're not used to doing that, can you give an example of how you might work with people in a group, how to get them into their bodies and feeling that? And because people are so scared to go in usually.
They are really not everybody, but yes, lots of people are really scared, and especially if you have a history of trauma and you're trying to, you know, stay away from all that, because if you go in there, you're going to fly up into the sympathetic,
Hmm.
right? And you're trying not to touch into that because you want to be able to kind of stay over in that dorsal place.
Right.
So we what I do is I talk about this in the book too, like how you look for openings.
Hmm.
So you have to kind of stage it. You might have the model in your mind of the autonomic nervous system and how you work with it. I have my way. And then I watch for, what are people um, you know, feeling in there. If I see something and I feel like I have enough warmth and connection
Hmm.
with the person, we have a flock place. I
Hmm.
might say, I notice there's a lot of feeling there in your body. That like you kind of got a little flush or some little tears came. If I feel that it's not poking at them, that
Right.
they're with me,
Hmm.
and that is a little window open, and then
Hmm.
we pause, right?
Hmm.
Um, or sometimes somebody will use the language, you know, even though we live in such a post Descartes era, where we value thinking and not so much feeling and embodiment. But you can see that it's in our language. So sometimes people might say something like, "It scared the beep out of me,"
Hmm.
and you know, there it is. It's like, what is that? That's a bodily response.
Yeah.
So I might just kind of slow that down a bit and go, so, you know, that sounds pretty intense. Like, you know, do you ever notice that something like that, like a really intense response can happen in your body?
Hmm.
What, you know, what's that like for you? And that might lead to all kinds of places, you know, and we might just talk around it. We just talk about it at
Right.
first,
Yeah.
at first. And then if there's a kind of opening, then we might go to step one in focusing, which is clearing a space.
Hmm.
And that's very, very similar to meditation, to
Hmm.
mindfulness, where we would just not go in anywhere to a deep, deep felt sense, but just work on clearing things that get in the way of finding a quiet place inside. So there's a lot of building safety first.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm. So I was just thinking of that
Yes.
flow place where you have some of the dorsal and you
Yes.
have some of the connection with
Temporal.
somebody,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And
That's
you
the
can
place.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
That's the place that we're working. And then we can teach that. There's a lot of teaching in this model, right? And with polyvagal theory. And most people love it. Not everybody does. I don't haul out the model with everybody because some people, but I
Yeah,
use it as a way of conceptualizing what's going
yeah,
on.
right.
Some people are not going to go into their body, or it might take years, and that's okay.
Mhm.
But then we work with grounding, right? Just
Right.
feeling your feet on the floor at least.
Yeah. I think it's so good how many orienting practices are around now. A lot of times people will do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 with the what you
Yeah,
5 see. People are looking behind them. I think that's so powerful to let your eyes
yeah,
notice that you're safe
yeah,
because then it's not a conscious mind, "I'm safe here." It's like, "Let me look and see." And the same as when we're taking deep breaths. We're not gonna be taking deep breaths if we're afraid. So
yeah,
just the fact that we're taking deep breaths helps to reassure our nervous system. And I just
exactly.
love how that's so much it's so much more available now.
Yeah, yeah. Steve does this really nice one that I use quite a bit too, with extending that exhalation breath. Really
Mm.
activates the ventral place, and
Mhm.
teaching people about that, and noticing. I think here's another thing about polyvagal that's so important, that noticing what neurophysiological state we are in
Yeah.
shapes our thinking, right?
Mhm.
It shapes how we perceive the world. So when you help people to understand, okay, what's your default? Where are you normally living in the nervous system?
Yeah.
Um, and they begin to appreciate, yeah, I'm kind of a dorsal turtley kind of person, or yep, I'm right up there in flight fight. And
Yeah.
then you can track, and Deb Dana does such a beautiful job with this too in her work. You can track the thoughts that are connected to those
Mhm.
different states. So if I'm feeling safe right now and I look at you and I see you're kind of smiling and it's a nice connection and we're in ventral. If I'm too much up into sympathetic and I look over at you, and suppose you just look away for a minute, and I might think, oh my God, Lynn's bored, or
Right.
this is terrible, it's a disaster. And then everything that flows from that reinforces that.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, what a liberating idea that we can change how we think about something by
Mhm.
understanding what state we're in. That's huge, right?
So can you bring in Steve's neuroception into this? How we don't read things correctly when we're
Yes.
in traumatic response.
Yeah, exactly. The neuroception was this word that he coined, right? For this awareness inside of what's happening in terms of how safe we are. And it's autonomic. It's not something that we're aware of. But I think with time, we can become more aware of it as a practice. That's really what we're teaching our clients. And I use it in my own self, a really sense of like, what's happening in my body. And when I worked with that, and I wrote about that in the book, about these lessons that we learn from polyvagal theory, and one of them is this notion of neuroception. That for me, it felt like my notion of neuroception shifted from, originally, it kind of, I grew up in flight fight mostly, had some ventral in there from my grandparents.
Mhm.
Um, that I had this sense of like a soldier watching guard. This was my state of neuroception, of this soldier watching the horizon to keep me safe. And over time, as I worked with that over many years of my own work, realizing that that sense, that sort of, if we think about like an animal as part of our neuroceptive system,
Mhm.
it became like a lion, like this kind of cozy, protective lion.
Mhm.
Um, or one of my clients called it the squelcher. It was this kind of like part of himself that was was for him very connected to dorsal of shutting
Mhm.
down, but not, but the neuroceptive part was this part that watched to see, you know, when am I safe, when am I not safe, and we
Right.
do this constantly.
We do.
Yeah,
Exhausting.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I found very interesting as I've, over the last few years, have been dipping more into polyvagal and understanding it more, but also working with other people and myself, is that I always had a freeze or a shutdown. That
Mhm.
was mostly where it was. And
Yeah.
how I would explain that is I was in denial. I wasn't able to see the truth about my relationships. I stayed in relationships that sucked. And so for me, that was kind of judgmental. Like,
Oh yeah.
why can't you wake up? Like, you should have woken up. You should have seen that, you know? And so to see that it's actually a nervous system response, it has been so helpful for me. It's like, okay, that's what was going on. At the time, I just thought, hey, I'm chill. I'm calm. There's no problem here. Right. And I didn't see it until much later that I was actually in freeze
Yeah.
and dissociated and so it really does help to let go of some of the judgment around our
Oh, it's
strategy.
huge. It's absolutely a huge paradigm shift, and you see it too in this language around codependence. A lot of judgment.
Yes.
Why would they stay, you know, in this kind of disdain and shame and, you know,
Yeah.
and so when we shift it into, oh, this is the body's way of surviving, we don't thrive, but we survive there, and then we can make choices, you
Yeah.
know, that are very different and very freeing. But it really behooves us to shift out of a pathologizing DSM model.
It
We
does.
we have to do. The other thing that is so important about this is that when we understand addiction as a result of all kinds of different trauma,
Mhm.
not mother blaming trauma,
Right.
but trauma that occurs at all stages of life and can occur from the moment of coming into the world where we don't feel safe because we don't live in a world that accepts us.
Right. Mhm.
And so we have to move out of these very, you know, heteronormative sort of models of attachment and and you know, ways of understanding trauma that are very limited, and really see it as like global trauma. For example, look at what's happening in the world. We're all of us are in a state of some degree of trauma, or
Yeah.
the trauma that occurs, you know, because we're in a technological revolution and people don't know how to handle the internet and they get addicted.
Right.
But we're not going to just blame mothers for that. Sorry, those days are over.
Right.
We really need a reshifting too of attachment theory, which I really enjoyed writing and reading about, studying different cultures and how attachment is understood in those cultures.
Mhm.
With, you know, many mothers, whole families and villages, and so that's a whole other area that needs a lot of work.
Right.
Um, and also really understanding how marginalization, um, how poverty, the role that poverty and racism plays in addiction.
Mhm.
Huge,
Yeah.
huge. So to just see it in this very limited way, uh, it really gets us off the hook of owning what we need to do to face the ways in which we treat each other.
Mhm.
And polyvagal theory is very much about that too. That we need to, with you know, this whole notion of nobody's safe unless we're all safe.
Right.
That's the social engagement system, right?
Well, and we can't socially engage with people who are objectifying us or threatening us, or, I mean, that's just not how it works. So it's no wonder that we walk through the world scanning for danger and protecting ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the amazing things, that's happening out of all of this now with COVID, social movements are uprising. Black Lives Matter, and the rates of addiction are horrifying because
Yeah.
people are so frightened and also speaking up.
Right.
Because people are lots more people that are marginalized are developing COVID because they don't have the privilege to be
Right.
able to keep themselves safe. So there's so much about polyvagal theory that is so relevant to now. And I
Hmm.
think, I really, really hope that we'll do a lot of work in terms of applying the concepts
Hmm. Hmm.
and changing the way that we practice. That
Right.
we can really free our clients from shame through understanding how our bodies work and get into the body and get working at a deeper level in the body.
Right. Yeah. So if someone who's listening to this is has got some addiction going on, maybe they've ramped up their wine from a few glasses a week to a few glasses a night or whatever it might be for people. There's
Mhm.
certainly a lot of Netflix binge watching
Yeah.
and Minecraft video games and all kinds
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
So how would people take this knowledge of, "Oh, this is my nervous system." How do they take that and put it into action? What are some things you'd suggest for people?
Well, one of the things that I like to use is this model that comes from Patrick Heron's work, actually, the three circles. It's a
Mhm,
simple little exercise that can be very hard to do,
mhm,
but it's not complicated. And basically, the inner circle are the behaviors or the bad habits that you want to be able to manage through what I use a harm reduction model.
mhm,
So, really, and it's good to work with other people around this. So not to just do it by yourself, but
mhm.
get into, work with another person around how to connect and talk together about these kinds of things. Um, Work in groups, or even other kinds of things. But let me finish the three circles. So it would be like looking at that in that inner circle at the things that you want to start to contain. So maybe instead of having 3 glasses of wine a night, you're going to have one.
Mhm.
You're going to start with that as harm reduction,
Yeah.
and you're going to be accountable to somebody else about it. Somebody that can be with you without shame.
Mhm.
The middle circle are the in the model. So I connected this actually to the visuals, the emojis kind of the model as a practice in the book. In the middle circle are the fight, flight, freeze places. So
Mhm.
what are the things that activate your nervous system and get you anxious that lead you into those inner circle behaviors?
Ah, right.
So it might be like a fight with your partner,
Mhm,
or too much spending too much time on the internet, for example, or
mhm,
whatever it is that gets you nervous and anxious and shut down or whatever. And the outer circle are the things that you can do and practice that bring ventral social engagement to your life, flow to your life, and fun. Those things that are connecting with other people and making eye contact and being together, which is
mhm.
hard during COVID, but
Right,
we have to work harder at those things. But there's a lot of stuff online now with groups as well.
right. Yeah.
So
I found that can be very connecting. Like, people in my groups are always saying, "Wow, it's I never thought we could actually get this close just online."
exactly, exactly,
Mhm.
yeah, that's a very interesting thing, isn't
And it's also, I think, a little safer. So people feel a bit safer. They can always just hit that button and go offline if something happens.
it?
You don't have to see that person again at the grocery store. These are people from all over the world. So I think it does feel a little less threatening maybe too, but easier if someone has social anxiety. Yeah.
Yes, and some of my clients have really talked about that, how they didn't like the kind of time in group where we would just be having a break, for example.
Mhm.
Oh, they're like stiffen up. So this way we don't have those kind of breaks. They're breakout rooms, but it's not like where somebody's hanging around and,
Yeah,
chatting without structure.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. Well,
yeah.
that's really cool. So you've taken this work of your 40 years of experience and
Mhm.
synthesized. I think that's what a really good therapist always does. We
Yeah,
synthesize our own work and
yeah,
other people's work into something that really is effective. And
yeah.
then now you're writing this book. Let's hear a little bit about the book. So what's the title? When's it coming out? All of that stuff.
The title is a bit controversial at this point, to be negotiated with Routledge. um, my title is "Treating Addiction from the Bottom Up:
Mhm.
a Felt Sense Polyvagal Model,"
Mhm.
um, and it's coming out next June.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
and yes, so it's an integration. It's I wrote it with kind of three voices. So there's the voice of the concepts, the
Mhm.
theories. There's my first person experiencing voice, so
Mhm.
my own subjective experience, which is um, something that we really work towards integrating in polyvagal theory too, right? That polyvagal theory is from the bottom up as well as the top down.
Right,
But
right.
our first person experiencing
Mhm.
is very important in embodied thinking.
Right.
And Gendlin has a whole philosophy called, a process model, which is about embodied thinking.
Mhm.
Beautiful work. I mean, Gendlin was a genius.
Mhm.
And he created a methodology called thinking at the edge, which is a way of bringing embodiment into conceptualizing.
Oh,
And that's how I've written the book. So there's the concepts and the theories that are presented. Then there's my first person experiencing, and then there's the reader's focusing practices.
okay. Right,
So there's my experience, your experience, and the work.
right.
And we take the concepts in these different theories in interpersonal neurobiology and in Gendlin's process model and in Steve's polyvagal theory, and we integrate these concepts into working with the body. So, for example, if we take this concept of neuroception, it's a
Mhm.
concept, right? It's something we
Right.
think,
Mhm.
but as we develop theory, we've in our culture we've left out the body. We
Right,
just talk about thinking, and we have like contempt for the body.
right.
What Jenlin said is no, no, no. We need to be developing theory that is embodied. It's informed by a body process.
Mhm.
And so I took the concepts, and then we go inside and ask into the body, how does my body carry this notion, this concept of neuroception? And that's how I came to these images of the soldier
Huh.
and the
Mhm.
lion.
Right, right.
It's incredible. Thinking at the edge is like so freeing. You have these ideas. So I had this idea, this paradox of what helps you harms you. And I took that inside. And I kept using the felt sense as a kind of way of integrating and experiencing the concepts throughout the book.
Right, right. Wow, I can hardly wait to read it.
Yeah, it was a journey. I grew and learned a lot as I went through that journey because it's a process. It's a
Right.
when we're alive, it's a process. It's like when you do an assessment with a client, you don't like ask 40 questions in the first session and then that's it. And then
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
We work in an embodied experiential way. So the questions emerge from the body
Right,
over time, and
right.
this is also so polyvagal, right? It's like,
Mhm, mhm.
you know, we work in this embodied way. The body is our teacher,
Right,
and the
right.
body has wisdom and knowing. Steve says a lot of things that Jen said.
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
it comes from this a similar place.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love his, Stephen Porges, the way he integrates the clinical research and he's been so affected by all of the people he knows that are clinicians and work directly with people, and I love how he does that.
Yeah.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah, and it's so
Yeah.
important that that work that they're doing, the research on trauma,
Yeah.
because it frees us in when we can get these things into the courtroom. And because neurophysiological work is much more recognized and valued in our culture, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
we have a more powerful voice,
Mhm.
um, to be able to explain these things in a court system. What is it that happens when you don't speak up and you don't say anything for 20 years? Why is that?
Right.
Well,
Right.
now we know why.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
knew why back then too, but we didn't have these kind of different ways of understanding that really increase the strength of the position.
Well, and having, mainstream medical research back it up, that's really important too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know I learned years ago about the vagus nerve through meditation and
Ah,
and just thought, wow, it's interesting how they've known yoga meditation knew so much about the vagus nerve and the nervous system. And yet, Stephen Porges' work and yours and people who are really working with this are really getting into the subtleties and the depths of it. And
the Eastern world has known this forever, right?
yeah,
Drumming and singing and chanting, and yeah, and that is starting to come more into embodied work, and but we have I and I'm hopeful, but we do have a long way to go because it's still very very motivated, grounded in pretty traditional ways of understanding. And I don't
right,
think you can just augment those ways with a bit of drumming or a
right,
bit of breathing or a body scan. No, that's not what this is about. It's radical shifting in how you
sure.
understand and take responsibility for how we have to help people in the world.
Mhm,
Yeah, by
mhm.
doing our own work, right?
So if people can't wait for June, how do they get a hold of you? What's your website?
JanWinhall.com is, I'm just building that website now. I'm starting a
Mhm.
training program with two other people in
Oh,
March. So keep an eye on that. I'll be
mhm.
doing work on the model, and then two of my colleagues are also doing some work around meditation and dream work, and so
Mhm.
we're gonna have fun with that. So it'll be like a 2-year training.
It will be online?
Yes, it will be online for focusing
Okay.
orient, very embodied work.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, you can get a hold of me, and I'm teaching courses on focusing on boredom.com. Gmail.com is my website for my groups and my
Mhm.
community. We have a community here, such as it is these days, but it's
Right.
alive
Now are you
online.
doing
Yeah.
yeah. Are you doing online groups now
Yes,
as
I
well
am.
then? Oh, good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Teaching the
Well,
model.
yeah, we'll put those links up here so people can see
Okay.
how to get a hold of you, and
Great.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you,
back on,
Lynn. It was
and
great to see you again.
you too.
Keep well.
Yeah. You too.
We'll keep
Yeah.
doing the work.